Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our board meeting for June 21st, 2021. Please join me in the flag salute to begin the evening. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We do have both an emergency addition and a modification to the agenda for this evening. The modification is that we are going to move item 4.2 above 4.1 because that is the way it needs to be done. Thank you to one of our public comments, Darius Lange, for pointing that out to us. With Kathy gone and us all taking on extra roles, that got flipped, so we appreciate that. And then in terms of the emergency modification, I am going to, so there is an item that a resolution that needs to immediate action, and it didn't come to the attention of the district until after the agenda was posted. And so the addition is for a resolution for the general fund, ASB funds moving from the general fund to a new category called, I believe it's Form 8, but I'm going to wait for my Fund 8 for my computer to open up. So with those changes, if I could have a motion, yes, Fund 08, a motion to approve with the addition and with the changes of the items.
So moved.
Second.
We'll take that, Kevin, as a second. All those in favor, Kevin?
Yes.
Michael?
Aye.
Rebecca?
Aye.
Shelley?
Aye.
And Jane? Aye. That passes 5-0. I do have one general public comment. And that is from Darius Lange. Says, I have sent this board information over the last few months regarding the need for stakeholder involvement. I have submitted an op-ed outlining my observation and submitted written comments regarding conflicts of loyalty, stakeholder engagement, and potential board policy violations. I and others have advocated for state testing and heard nothing from the superintendent. I have advocated to restore parent advisory committee in an emergency session 6 weeks ago. I have provided board and district a one-page profile from the National PTA LCAP seasons, which one can quickly deduce LCAP participation is not what is happening in our district. C19 was probably the most important time to engage a parent advisory committee. I have submitted examples of meaningful feedback to the body as samples of what meaningful PAC involvement. PAC and DLAC is the only body by statute that can submit written questions where the superintendent is required to respond in writing to any comments submitted by the committees. The statute also states that parent advisory committees are intended to advise the school board and superintendent on the implementation of LCFF, a role that requires more than simply providing comment to an already established plan. To comply with the statutory purpose, districts should meaningfully involve these committees in the development of the LCAP, as well as other aspects of LCFF implementation. Note the other suitable committee would be a DPAC, which is not what we have in Ohio. I believe both of our union presidents are on vacation and will not be joining us this evening.
Actually, Chuck is here. Chuck joined us.
While my eyes were turned away, you joined us. Thank you for joining us. It is your turn to have your comments. You've been out in the sun today. You're on mute.
There we go. Okay, thank you. Thank you for all the nice comments. And thank you for letting me speak this evening. As you guys know, I'm such pleased to be with Ohio Unified and all the hard work. Always want to acknowledge that. And I want to tell you about a great bargain. It's called classified employees. They have hung in there through the whole year. We're ready to go, keep going. And I just want to acknowledge that. And as we look at this budget and the hard work, we've worked with you on that, continue to work with you on that. Hopes that some people get some vacation here real soon. I'm excited to see our summer program going and the high numbers in there. So with that, I just wanted to remind you of the great bargain that classified employees are offering Ohio Unified. And we look forward to working with you in the coming years. Thank you.
Whoops, I was on mute. Thank you, Chuck. I hope you get some time off this summer too. I appreciate your comments and you're always being here for the board. And I'm sure your union appreciates it too. Board member reports. Is there anyone that wishes to speak tonight? Kevin? Michael? Rebecca? Shelley? Myself either. Okay, so we will move on again to the flip. So item 4.2, which is approval of the LCFF formula. We do have a public comment on that as well. Also from Darius Lange. I have submitted to the board and district a 7-page minimum statutory outline for the development of LCAP and LCFF funding and made the following notes. I would ask the board review and discuss this document tonight. Stakeholder engagement, advisory committees, PAC were not able to meet because they do not exist. Therefore, the superintendent has not presented the LCAP to each of the required committees. The superintendent has responded not in writing to comments from each of the required committees. Feedback is not available to stakeholders. Superintendent has not shown how comments affected the LCAP in a meaningful way. Goals and actions. Goals for all students and each student group addressing each state and any identified local priorities annually. LCAP mostly identifies special groups, ELs, LIs, foster. The summary only breaks down contributing, not all students, leaves out minimum requirements for funding sources, required materials, including technology, and teacher funding, credentialed contractors, etc. Goals and actions must include total funds budgeted for each action. The funds are to include teachers, materials, programs like Parent Square, reflect math, associated textbook by school site, if not district-wide funds. Expenditure tables. The LCAP does not include where funds for all students and subgroups, including personnel and non-personnel expenditures. This is a minimum requirement. The LCAP show mostly foster, LI, and ELs considered contributing. The table summary has contributing and in all expenditure sections show contributing. Basically, the input is backwards and then also missing the funding for materials and personnel, I think is what he means. Again, a minimum requirement. Marilyn, are you gonna start with us this evening? Is there anything that has changed since Wednesday that you would like to bring to our attention?
Taiwo and I did change. Taiwo, I might ask you, that first part may have had just a few dollars difference or a few on the BOP, on the board overview for parents. So Taiwo and I made it, it was aligned after the budget was completely finished. So it may have changed a few $1,000s.
Yeah.
In your packet though it hasn't changed since the version that's in your packet on from.
Right, correct. That's correct. Right.
And nothing materially that.
Yeah.
that-
It's all right. I made very minor changes to make sure it matches the actual, the numbers are exact to the budget and to the LCFF calculator and stuff like that. But they are very, very minor changes. There's nothing significant. I mean, it's just part of the tinkering and anchoring with the budget. The numbers change slightly, really. So, but nothing major.
I did want to say, and I don't know if I said this last time, but all of the pieces of your packet, the BOP, the board overview for parents, the learning continuity plan, the annual update for the 1920 LCAP, and the LCAP for 21-22. They are all using a state-approved, CDE-approved template. So it's impossible, actually, to do anything different. I know the BOP sometimes is a little funky when it turns into a pie graph and even that bar graph, but we're kind of stuck with the templates that we are required to use. So all of these documents use a CDE-approved template.
Marilyn, I'm glad you brought that up, because I actually think it's time to address some of these issues that Mr. Lange keeps bringing up, because I do think they are inaccurate, and I think it's important that anyone who's listening understands that. So first of all, myself as a board member, I know, Marilyn, that you have been to many trainings on this, that you have been involved with the LCAP since the day it was instituted, and that you are the expert. And that, as you say, these are forms that are required, that are given to us in the format. And actually, I have some of the things he stated about the money's not being there, I have gone through, and they are there, and they're listed in the goal that they are said to be at. So I'm sorry to say that I do listen, and I do appreciate comments, but I think that they're not accurate. That I know that the committees, I know on May 5th, you met with all the site councils, from each site, they came together, and that it was their input that actually created the goals. They weren't commenting on a pre-approved plan. And I know I did look up some LCAP information, and there is, my understanding of it, again, I could be wrong, I'm not the expert, but that the public comments that we had that session last Wednesday is for parents to have looked at it and make comments on it. But there is nothing in the LCAP that says beyond the Parent Advisory Committee, which you met with several times this year and which met again on May 5th, that group of parents are available to the public to answer questions or to hear from them. They are not an elected body, they are just an advisory committee. And so that's why the general public is guided towards the board, because we are a public body and we are the people that need to be hearing their questions and their concerns, not the Parent Advisory Committee. Am I right in the way I'm interpreting that?
Yes, it says that, or the statute says that the Parent Advisory Committee serves to advise the superintendent and the governing board. So the superintendent usually meets with the Parent Advisory Committee. I'm usually there. And if there are any questions or comments from the Parent Advisory Committee, then the superintendent responds in writing to those parent comments. The other thing I wanted to say is that the LCAP really is an iterative process. And so in the fall, for example, it's very dynamic. This is a very dynamic plan. So in the fall, for example, we might decide that, I think it's 1.6, the attendance action. We may come upon a program that might serve our students to increase and enhance their attendance. So there's nothing to say that we can't do that, because then that action becomes memorialized when we write the annual update. So remember, the annual update comes at the end of the LCAP year. And it really is, did you do what you said you were going to do? So it has the action, it has how the action was presented and acted upon. It has the budgeted expenditure, and then it has the actuals. So it really then as I said, memorializes what you did in your LCAP.
I would,
well,
sorry, I would love to add to that too, because I agree with you, Jane. The LCAP and the budget, for that matter, are both meant to be continually changing documents that move along with the needs of the district as the district expands each year. So, for example, last year when we were talking about COVID, we could have never known what was going to be needed in June of the prior year because it was changing constantly. And so they're meant to change and grow with the district. But I also think it's important to make the distinction, as the superintendent did last week, between the PAC that is referred to in legislation versus the parent advisory committees that we have here. They are not mutually exclusive. Lots of districts hold their LCAP meetings differently. Some open it up to the general public and just say, come, enjoy, listen to us. Some use a pre-designated group that they have set up in the beginning of the year, but they all do it a little bit differently depending on the group. But the PAC that the LCAP is referring to is just that they have representatives of those groups by those parents, which could be done in any meeting throughout the course of the year. And since we have held so many town halls and the superintendent has sought parent feedback numerous times through the course of this year, I would say that we went over and above what most districts had done for their LCAP feedback throughout the course of the year.
I think too, in kind of to piggyback on Rebecca's comment, really, I see this LCAP as having had more stakeholder involvement, like Rebecca just said, than any other year since it came into being, which was 2014. And it might be something for us as a district to look at. I think maybe it was easier virtually for parents to come to meetings rather than get a babysitter and that kind of thing. So we might want to rethink how we conduct our meetings, because we did have very, very good stakeholder input. The other thing about this particular LPAC, it's very streamlined and is meant to be very accessible to stakeholders. I have to say, in the previous 3-year cycle, 1 year we were encouraged to use I think the public comment referred to the SACS codes. 1 year, Ventura County Office of Education encouraged us to use the SACS codes in the annual update. And it made the document so long, and it was not accessible for the general public, because the general public might not always know what all those codes are. They just really want to know, what did you do? How much did it cost?
And how did it go after the goals that they had requested?
Yes. How did it, and what were the student outcomes? How did it impact our students, Ojai Unified students? How did it impact our students? That's really the most important thing about this plan, is student learning.
Which this year was hard to gauge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But we do know through our DNF rates and through our, I think it's IXL.
Yes, IXL at Matilaha. Uh-huh.
And then we will get, and actually even doing IXLs at the elementary level, although we also did the state testing at the elementary level. Mm-hmm. We also had iterative results and feedback. So I think that was helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Shelley, it looked like you wanted to say something now?
I was just nodding in agreement and said IXL. I forget that you can see me saying all these things, so sorry.
I have a few thoughts. So with respect, I think there are a number of things going on, and I don't know if he pronounces his name Lang or Lange. I sort of read it as Lang, so I'll call him Lang. you know, on the one hand, I don't believe that there is any legal deficiency in our LCAP and what we're doing and what we're presenting, and I'm going to approve it on that basis. On the other hand, as you know, I've been talking about whether we can find a way to formalize some kind of more district-oriented and formal PAC, like I believe is intended in the LCAP. You know, LCAP stands for, as we know, Local Control and Accountability Plan, and the whole idea of it was that Jerry Brown was instituting this big change in how school districts were run. It was no longer going to be, you know, just about board members and superintendents. It was now going to be the folks in each community, particularly the stakeholders and the parents, who would have a much greater say in how monies were spent and how school districts were run. So, you know, I have to say, I think I've been on the school board since I think it's been LCAP since we've been on, Jane and Michael. I don't think all that much has changed in that regard. Honestly, in some respects, I feel like, you know, LCAP is become like another bureaucratic burden. And the reality is, you know, for all of us who do things in the school districts, it is very hard to get people to engage in things like an LCAP. I mean, you know, it's easy to theorize that there are all these people out there who really want to have a lot of detailed engagement in how we spend money and what we do in a school district. But the truth is, historically, that hasn't been true. You know, and I remember some of those early meetings where we were kind of breaking into kind of visioning sessions, you know, and my wife and I were both there, and we were at different tables, and, you know, we've done a lot of different things and to try and get more engagement. But you know, as I've said, this is a future thing. I personally do believe that we could find a district-wide and interested group similar to our COC that could really act in a more engaged way with us about how we prioritize. And so, you know, going forward, I'll be bringing that. But, you know, as to where we are today and whether there is some legal deficiency, I don't believe there is. I am a lawyer, but I'm not an education lawyer. But I've read, like you, Jane, I've tried to, you know, look at all these details. I do believe that our use of the school site councils as a proxy for the PAC is appropriate. I believe the law says we can do that. I think it's a little different than your take on it, Rebecca. I don't think it can just be, you know, just general meetings. I don't think that's sufficient, but I do think the SAC is a pre-existing type of committee that can be used as a parent advisory committee for the LCAP. So anyway, a lot of different thoughts there, but that's my take on it.
So I do think that the comments that we've heard from a number of people and represent some confusion, which this is such a very simple process. It's I'm being facetious. It's a very complicated process, and so it is confusing. The fact that terminology seems to be similar, you know, advisory committees, formal, not formal. I think things are getting conflated. And so one thing looking forward would be more specificity in terms of how we plan on getting our LCAP input, like upfront, like what is our plan? And that way we could sort of show where it's coming as opposed to trying to explain it now. And that might help. Yeah, anyway, that's all my thinking now. Marilyn, this is great work, but yeah, it is very confusing. I did go through this, and as with Jane, in many areas, I think I see some of the things that Darius is saying are not there. And in some cases, I think it's a matter of interpretation, but I'm comfortable with this.
And Michael, it's interesting what you just said. I thought, you know, at the beginning, we did call those meetings LCAP meetings. And we kind of came away feeling like, well, maybe that's why no one comes, because they think it's this big, boring document. And so we started calling them other things. But, so you know, maybe I think you and Kevin are right in clarifying what it is and how we can reach the public. We certainly have a very engaged community. We have many volunteers in our schools. And I think it's important that we find a way to clarify for people what, how they can get involved and how each thing might be. I mean, some people are very specific. I just want to be in my child's classroom.
Yeah.
Right. And somebody, I'll help in the library, I'll whatever. And some will be like, oh, I'll serve on a site council, and some might be serve citizens oversight. So there's so many levels that I think helping clarify the LCAP versus Tiffany's, superintendent advisory, parent advisory, and that sort of thing will be helpful. So Kevin, I look forward to your kind of helping us do that in July.
I just want to jump in and say that I had a different interpretation, Kevin, of Rebecca's comments about the different we're getting our LCAP meetings. I totally agree that the school site councils are important to the LCAP process because they do make sure that we have the designated groups that we're hearing from. But I would hate to think that we have all these other meetings like these town halls and such, and aren't incorporating that just because we didn't call it an LCAP meeting. That information is so important also and belongs as part of the process. So I'm confused as to why that wouldn't be included in this. It seems absolutely appropriate that it would be, in my estimation.
To be clear, I think it's the other way around. I was saying my understanding of LCAP is it has a particular requirement as to a particular kind of oversight. And it seems like both you and Rebecca are saying we have both that and more. I'm not disagreeing with the and more part. I'm just saying I do believe there is a particular kind of oversight that is required, and I believe that occurred through the school site councils.
The only thing that maybe I would add to clarify my comments is that in the districts where I've seen it be incredibly open, where they would put an all call out for parents, the result was that we had a lot of parents who would normally not serve on things like school side council or in like a traditional kind of PAC meeting. And so we got really great input from a variety of people who didn't have time to commit to those types of groups, which allows for additional stakeholder input from people that we don't get input from. And so like we had a lot of our DLAC and ELAC members be involved. And for me, I thought it was great because it gave those parents who could only be involved one or two nights the opportunity to say, oh yeah, I'll jump into a meeting for an hour, but I can't commit to the entire year. And we have a lot of parents that are working and are busy and don't have that time. So, I mean, I love the openness process, and I felt like it gave a better example of the actual parents who didn't take, who couldn't take the time to be in like weekly or monthly meetings.
I totally agree, Rebecca, and I think that speaks to the equitable aspect of it as well, that we're hearing from all parents have the chance, not just those who have large amounts of time to dedicate.
Any
Sure.
other questions?
Is there a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve.
I'll second. All those in favor, Kevin,
Yes.
Michael,
Aye.
Rebecca,
Aye.
Shelley,
Aye.
and Jane, aye. That passes 5-0. Thank you, Marilyn, very much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Our second item is the budget 4.1. I do have a comment on that as well. From Philip Bagley. Oh, he says 5.1. Is it 4? I think he means 4.1. At the board meeting last week, it was said that no reductions in classified or certificated personnel were planned, yet the budget actually shows reductions in the category: 9.7 FTE reductions in certificated positions, 3 FTE reductions in classified positions, and 2.6 FTE reductions in management supervision confidential from this year, 2021, to next, 21-22. Can you explain? Also, the number of positions in each category remains constant during subsequent years, 22-23, 23-24, despite the fact that the positions are apparently being funded using one-time COVID funds. The budget reflects a huge reduction in revenue next year, 22-23. How is it possible to maintain the classified, certificated, and management positions at that level? Finally, isn't the claim that the district is not using one-time revenue for ongoing expenditures, see the standards review portion of the budget, page 14 of 27, only true because the money is being incorrectly categorized in books and supplies, services and other expenditures, and professional consulting services instead of where it should be categorized?
So with the budget, there have not been any significant changes since you saw this last week. We were able to add the SACS reporting, which you saw in the packet, but there haven't been any changes, and I haven't received any questions from board members specific to the budget. So if you want me to go over anything additionally, I'm happy to do so.
I would just like to, I think because this is an agenda item, I can address some of those questions. It is my understanding that with retirements and moving, there's a natural reduction that is not sort of a planned reduction based on declining enrollment. So the way we project the budget in the past and tonight is to say, well, if we project that we're going to have this amount of students and we project that we're going to have this income, if we were to match those two up based on how we spend money today, it means fewer staff members. And so as a placeholder, because it's multiple years out, we say the only way to meet that is to reduce our FTEs. But we don't always actually reduce the FTEs by those amounts. Sometimes we end up reducing our books, or we find that we've saved money, on water because there was a leak that we fixed at the elementary level. Or so the budget is moving. So the out years, the easiest way to say that we can meet our budget requirements is to say we can always reduce our staffing, but we don't always choose to reduce the staffing.
That's correct. Or we may let attrition take its course. So we may not always replace someone who's retiring if that particular elementary school is going to have fewer students, or if someone is moving, or et cetera. So there's a natural change in staffing actually throughout the entire year, which isn't reflected in the budget as a particular line item for staff reductions.
And actually, Tiffany, I did send you a question about the COVID funding. My concern, you answered it for me. In terms of the sort of placeholders, I have concerns about the way it's listed in terms of just being books and supplies. And if I'm going to share your answer to me, and if I get it wrong, if you can correct me, was that if we're not absolutely sure that, we're going to have 3 extra teachers at elementary, because right now we don't know our kindergarten enrollment, and we don't know exactly how many parents are actually going to decide, yes, we're coming back versus doing independent at Summit. The requirement for those COVID funding would be to actually spell it out, to say, here's the personnel that we are using, and here's where they will be. And since we don't know that yet, it's not that we won't be using this funding for, say, I'm just making it something up, 2 new elementary teachers so that we can have smaller classrooms. Since we don't know for sure, that the easiest placeholder is something where it's not, where the specific is not required.
Right, that's correct. And as we are staffing for next year and we're looking at, for example, again, retirements or changes in enrollment, those are all specific. Anything that we hire, anyone that we hire with COVID is a temporary position. And so we want to make sure that we, backfill the necessary permanent positions and then look at our temporary staffing, because COVID staffing, again, is one time. And so they don't become permanent positions. We really want to kind of keep those separate. And so for right now, until we work on and finalize our ESSER 3 plan, which is due in July, the easiest place to put this funding for COVID is in the materials and supplies, because it only is one category and it doesn't affect, if we put something in staffing, it affects benefits, it affects all of our health and welfare, all of those other statutory pieces. And so it's much easier to move our funds there when we have specific information than to use staffing as a placeholder, if that makes sense. So, but absolutely a large percentage of our COVID funding will be spent on staffing.
In keeping with the idea of the LCAP, one, I just think this is such an unusual year. I just feel like it's very hard to, even necessarily take lessons from where we are right now with COVID and ESSER and different sources of money that are sometimes one time. It's very, very difficult to, estimate exactly how monies will be used, especially when we're not always even sure how much we're going to get. But as a, future idea, in keeping with the LCAP, what I have to say as a board member, and not a finance person, I look at the budget and it's hard to land. It doesn't, land with me in terms of, giving me a sense of, as I sometimes say on a subject, where the action is. To me, there are probably some areas where the action is here, where, okay, we have X amount of money that goes out the door, and it's the overwhelming majority of the money goes out the door to pre-existing obligations, especially, the pensions, the salaries, etc. Here's this money where there is some action, there is some discretion, there's some, maybe we use it here. One superintendent might use it here, a different one might use it there. I'd like to have more of that conversation. I know this is a very unusual year, but hopefully in the future, and I'm not putting this on you, Tiffany. I guess it's really on me. I'd like to find a way, especially for my constituents, to pull out where the action is. To show where the decisions are being made, as opposed to the things that are not really. They're just not. There is no decision to be made. We have to spend this money, and and the money is almost already obligated.
So, with respect, those come to you in board meetings when we bring things for approval, right? So, for example, the bar contract or Canvas contract or contracts generally, right? So, if it's over $20,000, it always comes to you in advance for approval. And so those are the conversations around the funds that we have some ability to change, right? And so what you then see in the budget is the cumulative total of those things that you have approved. And then if we make some different decision throughout the year, those come back to you. And if they're a ratification, or they would come to you in the consent calendar agenda item. So, everything that we spend in the district comes through the board in a couple of different mechanisms. But the items in which we are considering, should we do this or should we not do this, those all come to you in advance.
Yeah, I agree, and I guess that's the point. And it's kind of been a lot of what the conversation has been about the budget. We've talked about whether one year informs the next year, And we've talked about how realistic a quote budget really is in terms of what we're going to do. It feels to me because in all honesty, I can't think of a thing where the board hasn't approved a proposed expenditure that we were told we could afford. So when it comes in the real time, month to month of our meetings, as the expenditure, is incurred or is about to be incurred, whether it's a ratification or an approval, presumably that's a reflection of some broader philosophy that might be more, might be able to be talked about in a budget. As we really feel like this year going forward, you're going to see a bunch of, I'm going to come to you with some expenses that are different from last year. Here's what you'll be seeing. You'll be seeing more one-on-one education, or you're going to really make a big push, kind of like some of our organizations have done that support our district, where they say this year we're going to really focus on music, or this year we're going to really focus on technology, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, Kevin, those have come through, like when we did the TOSAs for a couple of years,
Right.
that there are specific things that you can see. Sometimes it's harder, and I have a feeling that the ESSER, am I saying it right, is going to be more like that. It's going to be very, like last year we understood, we're going to need more aides in the classroom. We're going to need people who are doing aftercare or sort of even before we were in person. We were providing daycare for TK and K. So I think some of those things are apparent, and some are less apparent. So I think maybe finding ways to draw them out or relate them to the budget when we're covering them might be helpful, because I know sometimes we lose track as a board of those things, and maybe community members would too.
I would say, just coming from a board member who is also a CBO dealing with the budget, I feel like as a board member, the most important thing that we're looking at is that we're not overcommitting ourselves in out years, like to the point where we have massive negative out years, like the county wouldn't even approve a budget like that. So this year is particularly difficult because of all the one-time money we have and all of the unknown expenses. Just like we were saying, we couldn't like I said earlier, we couldn't predict what we were going to need this year with COVID. Next year when students come back, like, yes, they were back for a little bit, but figuring out, being in the classrooms and figuring out where the learning loss is and what we're actually going to need once students are back and we see how they're performing in a normal day-to-day is a very different animal. So I feel like our budget has done a good job of not taking one-time monies and making them long-term goals, but making them goals for the immediate following year. And that we're also, aligning with the fact that we, generally have a declining enrollment trend, like most of the state of California does. And we're showing that, as students decline and people retire, those budgets will reduce. But I think it's really the big picture. The budget is the big picture that changes to the needs of the school district as the school district needs change throughout the year. And that's when we look at the first interim and we see what changes we're making from our original budget to the first interim, then we can say, oh, we're clearly realizing that X, Y, and Z is really important. And I think it's important at some point to, make sure that our board goals that we have for the superintendent are reflected in how our budget is progressing throughout the year with the first interim and the second interim. But I think we've done a good job in our budget of reflecting the very complex fiscal times that we have currently.
So Rebecca mentioned the board goals, and we have 7, and under each one of those there are numerous specific actions that we have all discussed and agreed that the superintendent would make happen. And we've been getting regular reports on that. I'm just wondering if maybe, is it that somehow we're not connecting those, because that's where the prioritization happens. Are we not connecting that with the resulting budget numbers? Is that maybe where the disconnect is? I'm not clear.
I think that's what our superintendent has been doing throughout the course of the year. Maybe we need it laid out in a different format. The budget format that we get is terrible and difficult to look at for
So it's
even
mind numbing.
yeah, for even people who are fiscally
Apologies to
minded
Taiwo
people.
and everybody else,
Yes.
but
It is not good for public consumption at all. But I think that if we can bring ourselves back to like all of the goals that the superintendent has showed us and met through what has been funded over the last year, to me, it was quite impressive. And I feel like we're going to continue on that trajectory and could maybe get an update at first interim as to where we are in meeting those goals fiscally, you know.
I would also like to say, for the future, as we've been mentioning some things that I know our OFT and our CSEA negotiations are going to be happening in the late summer and early fall. And this year being a particularly, there's so much that we were dealing with in the spring. It wasn't a year to begin negotiations, but I hope that we can kind of make those changes. I mean, we have over my 7 years done retroactive raises. They're always more difficult to head into the school year not knowing. It's always, I'd say maybe 50% of the time we've been able to know ahead of time. And if we can make that a goal in the future to try to be able to say, hey, let's see if we can get on that earlier so that we head into the fall with people feeling like, I know that the board really values me because they gave me a raise. And that's everybody. That's management, that's administration, it's CSEA, it's teachers. And I know there's a lot of funds that we don't know until August because they are aides in the classroom. We don't know, again, exact numbers. We don't know IEP needs. Those kind of things aren't necessarily known. And there's obviously every March when we hand out those pink slips, it's because we don't know. And those things will always be unknown when we approve the budget. But that's the one thing that kind of breaks my heart right now is that we're still showing a salary enhancement of 0 for everyone. I know this year, I appreciate we had an off schedule salary enhancement with the COVID funding, and I think it was between 2 and 3%. So I'm happy that even though officially the budget doesn't show that our staff was able to receive that extra funding, but know that it's in my heart.
I would also comment, Jean, that there has been negotiations going on all year. They were just for COVID MOUs that were required, which has pushed a lot of districts into not being able to negotiate for salary or benefit up to this point because the COVID negotiations took the majority of the year for most districts. So I don't think it was a lack of desire. It was more just figuring out what to do with COVID and trying to get people back in the classroom. And so, yeah, I think that's standard right now. I would move to approve the budget if there's no more comments.
I'll second.
All those in favor? Kevin?
Yes.
Michael?
Aye.
Rebecca?
Aye.
Shelley?
Aye.
And Jane? Aye. That passes 5-0. I believe now we will do our emergency edition. Let me just check. For resolution 202134, authorizing the establishment of Fund 8 Student Activities Special Revenue Fund.
So this is something that everyone in the county is doing now or close to now. We just didn't have it on this particular agenda, but it's essential to us being able to close our books. So right now our ASB funds are in with the general fund, so to speak. But we usually have separate funds. For example, the cafeteria is a separate fund, our bond is a separate fund. And so new GASB procedures and recommendations are that we move our ASB funds into a separate fund. So this is to create Fund 8 and then to move our ASB funds into a separate fund so that they are tracked outside of the general fund, basically.
I'll move to, are there any questions? Kevin, Michael?
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor, Kevin?
Yes.
Michael?
Aye.
Rebecca?
Aye.
Shelley?
Aye.
And Jane, aye. That passes 5-0. And again, it was myself that made the motion. Future items, agenda items, parking lot, questions, comments? Okay. I think we are finished with the agenda. We will adjourn to closed session for superintendent evaluation. We will sign off this one and come on to our other Zoom meeting.
And just to be clear, Jane, there's no action taken during the evaluation, and so you will not be returning to open session to report out on anything.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Taiwo. Thank you.